Drake Patterson's grin twisted when I walked past him that morning, like he knew something I didn't. That alone should have set off alarm bells, but I was already late for a contract review call with the Navy Procurement Office. And when you're running point on a $28 million submarine component deal, you don't pause for smirking MBA kids in their $400 loafers. Still, I clocked it. That twitchy little flicker on his face, the kind men wear when they've confused betrayal for leadership. I'm Garrison Wells, 51 years old, and I've been dealing with that exact look for most of my adult life. 16 years I'd been at Apex Manufacturing. 16. I joined when it was 3 machinists and a glorified CNC mill sharing floor space with a welding shop that folded 6 months later. I wrote the first production specifications on my kitchen table. I onboarded the first DoD vendors from my garage while my son Hunter was learning to ride his bike in the driveway. I didn't wear suits or quote business school case studies. I built the goddamn skeleton of this operation while Drake polished his LinkedIn profile every quarter. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you for real. Anyway, I didn't start this story to brag. I'm not good at bragging. I'm good at remembering, like remembering how in 2011, Drake nearly wrote me out of the equity agreement after our first major defense contract. Said I was too operations heavy to justify executive voting rights. I didn't fight back then. I drafted Clause 18C instead. Quietly, no one noticed, not even our lawyers who were too busy playing golf with the lead investor. Clause 18C. Executive equity accelerates at full valuation if any material change in role, authority, or direct reports is imposed without mutual agreement. That clause was my insurance policy, my tactical nuclear option, and my retirement plan rolled into one clean sentence. And Drake had just yanked the pin without realizing it. But let's rewind just a little. Before the clause was triggered, before Colton, before the memo, it started 2 weeks ago. Drake strolled into my office with a mug that said "Disrupt Everything," which told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation was going to go. "We're thinking about modernizing operations leadership," he said in that chirpy way that sounds like he's reading from a consultant's presentation deck. "Strategic realignment, streamlined structures." I adjusted the torque wrench on my desk. System pressure was definitely elevated. "You want me to write my own replacement manual?" He laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. No, he said, just a transition memo, best practices, where the access codes are stored, who handles Navy renewals, what systems we use for quality control oversight, that kind of thing. The kind of thing only someone in full operational control would know. I told him I'd have it by Friday. Then I spent 3 hours reviewing my original employment agreement, which I'd printed out and stored in a fireproof safe next to Hunter's college diploma and my Navy discharge papers. Clause 18C stared back at me like a loaded torpedo with the safety off. I drafted the memo. I included every access protocol, every renewal schedule, every vendor contact, and certification requirement. Then I added something extra. A little section I labeled critical system dependencies with just enough technical complexity to make a first-year lawyer sweat. Before sending it, I forwarded a PDF to my personal email. Then I hit send. They thought they were setting up a smooth transition. I was setting the charges. Drake didn't say the words out loud, not at first. That would have taken spine. Instead, he floated them in polite boardroom nonsense, dropping phrases like succession planning and next-generation leadership like they were harmless. We were in the middle of prepping for the submarine contract rollout, so I chalked it up to his usual caffeine-fueled delusions of corporate grandeur. But then, quietly, a calendar invite landed in my inbox titled Transition Planning, Operations Knowledge Transfer. I opened it, then stared at it for a solid minute, just breathing through the implications. It was addressed only to me. No CC, no witness, just one line in the body. "Hi Garrison, can you outline everything you handle on the operations and manufacturing side? Full spectrum, all vendors, active contracts, renewal cycles, compliance triggers, and where the credentials sit, trying to map the operational landscape." Trying to map the landscape. "The way you map terrain before an assault," I replied. "Sure, I'll put it together." But in the background, I started gathering documentation. 16 years of documentation. Vendor onboarding timestamps, security clearance renewals, certification matrices. I had a master file called Systems Bible, and they didn't even know it existed. I updated it obsessively every month. It wasn't a control thing, it was survival. Drake thought he was conducting quiet succession planning. What he was actually doing was stepping into a minefield I'd rigged after our first major acquisition back in 2011, when the same investors who praised my efficiency reports tried to edge me out before Series B. That's when I started writing contracts like they were battle plans. You don't win wars with feelings. You win them with precision and preparation. Clause 18C wasn't a bluff. It was buried in the second addendum to my executive agreement, right under a paragraph about vesting schedules. I'd slipped it in when legal was too distracted redlining Drake's founder provisions. The language was surgical, full value acceleration triggered by any material change in authority, reporting lines, or role not explicitly agreed to in writing. I read that clause 3 times, then pulled the signed version out of my archive and emailed a clean copy to myself, time-stamped. Then I made sure it was printed and stored in my home safe behind Hunter's engineering degree and my old Navy commendations. When I drafted the memo, I made it perfect, brutally detailed. Every system they didn't understand, every dependency they'd stumble over. And at the bottom of page 6, I added one final line. All systems listed require direct executive authorization to reset without incident. Translation: remove me and the production line stops cold. I hit send and then I waited, not anxious, just prepared. Because if Drake was going to feed me to the next golden boy consultant, he was going to choke on the paperwork first. It happened fast, but it felt like slow motion. Monday morning, 8:32 a.m., just like clockwork. I was finalizing a quality control report when the office door swung open and in walked Drake, beaming like he just closed a Fortune 500 deal. Behind him, Colton Pierce, 28, maybe 29, with the smug energy of a man who thinks his MBA makes him a manufacturing expert. Designer glasses still on indoors in my office. Drake didn't even pause, just walked right up and dropped it like he was announcing a lunch order. Colton will be leading operations now, he said, clapping me on the shoulder like we were in some sitcom handoff. You'll support him. Maybe stay on as a senior advisor. A senior advisor to Colton. I turned slowly in my chair and met Drake's eyes. That grin of his, God, it had layers. There was the fake warmth, the patronizing confidence, and underneath it a sliver of anticipation like he expected me to thank him. I appreciate the clarity, I said, voice flat as a machine surface, and I smiled back just enough to make him wonder. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't even ask why. I just closed my laptop, stood up, and left the room quietly. The next morning, I found Colton hovering outside the CNC control room, poking at his phone like it was supposed to unlock industrial secrets through proximity. He looked up when I approached, wide-eyed like he was about to ask me to fix his Wi-Fi. So, he said, voice pitching up like he was trying to sound casual, ready to show me how it all runs. I stopped just short of the door, let the silence breathe between us. Then I smiled, small and precise. No, I said, I'm here to watch what breaks. His smile hung in the air for a second too long before it fell. He didn't know the access codes. He didn't know the legacy protocols, or the redundancy chains, or what would happen if he approved a material change during a live production cycle. He didn't even know that most of our Navy vendor contacts still routed through security clearances registered to me. All he knew was what Drake had told him, that he was in charge. Now, what Drake hadn't told him, what no one told him, was that authority without understanding is a death trap, and Colton had just stepped into it wearing Italian loafers and a Patagonia vest. I walked past him and keyed into the control room, left the door open behind me. He didn't follow? Good. Let the silence teach him something Drake never did. I wasn't going to sabotage them. I wasn't even going to lift a finger. Physics would do the rest. At 1:04 p.m., my attorney handed the envelope to the front desk at Apex Manufacturing, certified, sealed, and time-stamped. Inside, a 4-page notice addressed to Apex's general counsel, outlining a material unilateral role change in violation of my executive agreement. Legal language? Sure. But the kind that cuts through corporate nonsense like a plasma torch. By 1:36, I saw the Slack thread explode. Legal pinged HR. HR pinged Drake. I didn't have access to their full internal channels anymore, but I had contacts in a few places they'd forgotten to scrub. Old group messages, archived channels, back doors no one thought to seal. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The package my attorney sent was comprehensive. First, a printed copy of my signed equity agreement dated 2011 with Drake's initials on every page. Then, a summary of Clause 18C highlighted in yellow. Executive equity accelerates at highest recorded valuation if any material change in role, authority, or direct reports is imposed without mutual agreement. Then came the attachments. A PDF of the transition memo request with metadata showing the timestamp and origin. The updated org chart that stripped me of all direct reports. An audio transcription of the Monday morning handoff to Colton. A summary log of my previous duties versus current assigned role. By 2 p.m., the company's general counsel had read it twice and forwarded it to the board with a subject line that said simply "You Argent, Clause 18C, Executive Equity Conflict." That's when the real panic started. See, I wasn't just a glorified project manager. I was an executive on paper, on record, with rights they didn't even remember granting me. They thought removing me from direct reports was a formality. They thought the word advisor would soften the blow. They didn't realize that demoting an executive during an active Navy contract quarter without a signed agreement was like dropping a wrench into precision machinery. And Clause 18C was the wrench they'd thrown with a smile. Colton still hadn't figured out why his system access was limited. He thought it was a permissions glitch. Drake, meanwhile, had gone from swagger to silence. I watched him disappear from Slack that afternoon. No updates, no calls, just a little gray dot next to his name flickering like a failing signal. By evening, I got a text from a colleague in finance. "Did you actually trigger a payout clause?" I didn't answer. I just stared at my screen, watching the company I helped build try to wrap its head around what it had just done. I wasn't being emotional. I wasn't even angry. I was simply watching a system execute the parameters they'd given it. That's the thing about precision manufacturing. You build it right, and it doesn't care who's in charge. It just runs. That evening, while most of the team was heading out for overpriced drinks and networking nonsense, Colton sat alone in his glass-walled office, jabbing at his keyboard like the system owed him something. He was trying to get into the manufacturing control panel, the real back end, not the shiny dashboard with widgets and KPIs. The bones, the grid, the operational heartbeat. Access denied. He tried again. Different credentials, admin override, shared passwords. Still nothing. He thought it was a bug. Maybe something I forgot to update. Maybe the old system was finally breaking down, justifying all his preloaded plans to modernize operations with whatever consultant framework he'd skimmed that week. But nothing was broken. I hadn't locked him out. He'd never been granted full access in the first place. See, Colton was used to systems that begged to be used, but ours was built differently, layered, compartmentalized, and calibrated to distrust enthusiasm. Credentials weren't just passwords. They were positions. Access wasn't a click. It was a chain of authority codified over years, linked to one name, mine. By 7:42 p.m., I saw the first trace of real panic. The company-wide operations channel buzzed with pings. Someone from engineering tried to escalate permissions through the admin shell. Another pinged legal asking if the org chart changes had officially posted. They had, which was the problem. At 8:03, the head of IT ran a full credential audit. Every command protocol, vendor relay, and security certificate routed through master keys tied to my executive profile. Deactivating me wouldn't unlock access. It would crash the entire structure, because when you spend 16 years building a system, you don't leave backdoors, you leave insurance. And Clause 18C wasn't just active, it was radioactive. Removing me now would trigger not just acceleration, but liquidation of all remaining Class B shares at full valuation, plus legal penalties for breach of agreement. And thanks to the clause's placement right before the quarterly close, it meant they'd owe it this quarter, not next. No kicking it down the road. The only way to move forward was to either get me to cooperate or deactivate me, and both options were poison. The next morning, Colton didn't come near the control room. He didn't say a word to me in the hallway, just stared down at his phone like it might explain how a system could exist that didn't respond to authority, just to structure. He thought power came from title. But manufacturing doesn't care what's on your business card. It only listens to who still holds the keys. Wednesday morning, 9:11 a.m. A ping lit up the legal team's Slack thread with a message no one wanted to see. Pulling Clause 18C again. Check line 42. Acceleration language might include Q3 valuation. It came from a junior associate named Riley Dixon, barely a year out of law school. She wasn't even supposed to be reviewing executive contracts that week, but she had a habit of reading everything. And she found the line they all missed. Buried deep in the clause, right between two benign sentences about vesting calculations, was the trigger. Equity accelerates at highest recorded valuation if role redefinition is imposed within an active federal contract quarter. And Apex was right in the middle of executing the largest contract in company history. A $28 million Navy deal tied to submarine component manufacturing. We were 2 weeks into implementation, performance bonuses, valuation spikes, and military reporting requirements, all of it wrapped into Q3. That line turned my exit from a demotion into a detonation. My equity package, once safely nested under Class B deferred shares, had just exploded in value. $6.8 million, calculated at the current peak valuation they themselves had trumpeted in board updates and investor memos. And by triggering Clause 18C during federal contract execution, they owed it all within 30 calendar days, payable in full. There was no wiggling out, no language about arbitration, no fine print to dilute or defer. They'd built that quarter on my roadmap, on the system I architected, the pipeline I secured, the vendors I held together with 20 years of quiet leverage and precision engineering. They tried to strip me out like a faulty component and forgot that I was the power supply. I wasn't in the loop for the fallout, but someone from finance called a friend of mine that afternoon and asked, off the record, if she thought I'd settle for half. She just laughed. "You don't know him," she said. Colton was still clueless. His biggest concern was that someone had changed the production dashboard layout. I heard from one of the engineers that he spent the better part of that day making a PowerPoint titled "Streamlining Legacy Operations," like rebranding the problem might solve it. He'd identified several inefficiencies in our quality control protocols. What he'd actually identified were the redundancies that kept us from shipping defective submarine components to the Navy. Drake, meanwhile, was silent, radio silent, the kind of quiet you only hear when someone's realizing just how badly they've misplayed a game they thought they invented. The board had already approved the org chart. It was public, filed, shared with stakeholders. A done deal. They'd pulled the trigger, not knowing it was wired to a payout bomb. And now they had 30 days to figure out how to explain to investors that they owed me more than $6.8 million, because they wanted me to train a guy who couldn't even pronounce metallurgy correctly. You build your value quietly for 16 years, they'll call it loyalty. You collect on it in one clause, they call it warfare. They usually cater these board meetings like it was the Oscars. Carved salmon, branded water bottles, floral arrangements too expensive to justify. But that Monday, the table at Apex HQ looked bare. Someone had pushed the pastries to the side. No one touched them. The investors had arrived early, suits pressed, expressions fixed somewhere between amusement and quiet fury. They already knew, at least the ones who mattered did. The whispers had started Thursday. By Friday, someone had looped in the capital partners, and by Monday, the chair had just one line on her notepad. She didn't waste time. Why wasn't Clause 18C reviewed before you restructured operations? She asked, voice sharp enough to cut titanium. The room went dead quiet. I wasn't there, of course not, but two people were, and both of them messaged me within 10 minutes of each other. One was from finance, the other from legal. Neither of them even tried to hide the satisfaction. Apparently, Drake blinked hard, opened his mouth, then closed it. Colton, meanwhile, leaned forward like a kid who just heard his name called during roll call. Wait, what's 18C, he said. I imagine the pause that followed was long enough to echo. The company's lead counsel didn't answer him. She just reached into her folder, pulled out the printed executive agreement, and slid it across the table to Drake like it was a death certificate. He picked it up, scanned the first few paragraphs, flipped to the middle, slowed down at the highlights. His hand started to shake just slightly. No one said a word, not even Colton, maybe especially not Colton. The chair leaned back, folded her arms. You signed off on the reorg, she said, tapping her pen against the table. It's been filed, dated, legally binding. We're now obligated to accelerate the largest executive equity package in this firm's history, in the middle of a cash-tight quarter during a federal contract window. And you're telling me none of this came up in review? Drake said something then. No one could quite hear it. The chair didn't care. This, she said, pointing to the document, is either gross negligence or willful ignorance. Either way, it's now a $6.8 million mistake that comes out of this quarter's performance. Someone coughed. One of the younger VPs excused himself and didn't come back. And Colton, he finally leaned back in his chair, real quiet, real still, probably wondering how his new title had turned him into the most expensive consultant in company history. I heard later that after the meeting, Drake tried to call me twice. No voicemail, just hang-ups. And Colton, he apparently asked someone in IT if Clause 18C was something they could patch. No, sweetie. That's not how this works. You can't patch executive precedent. You can't reboot trust. And you sure as hell can't debug a signed contract filed with time-stamped supporting evidence and legal teeth sharp enough to bite through an entire quarterly report. The call came in Thursday morning at 10:17 a.m. I was at home, standing in the kitchen scraping burnt oatmeal out of a pot with the back of a spoon when my phone buzzed with a number I recognized but hadn't seen in years. Apex's outside counsel, not some junior rep. This was Marcus Hartwell himself. The man they called in when lawsuits got real or investors got spooked. The same man who once toasted my promotion at the company holiday party back in 2016 with a glass of $400 whiskey and told me, "You're the backbone. You know that?" Apparently the backbone had become too expensive. I let it ring twice, picked up on the third. "Good morning," he started, doing his best to sound casual. "We've all been a little surprised by how things unfolded this week. Drake speaks very highly of you. Still does. We were hoping to explore an arrangement that's mutually beneficial. I didn't say anything, just listened, stirred the oatmeal, let him twist. We understand there's been a contractual activation," he continued, choosing each word like it might bite him. "But perhaps there's a version of this that doesn't result in immediate payout pressure. Perhaps we convert the equity into a deferred compensation structure in exchange for, say, a full mutual release, some non-disclosure terms. Maybe even a consulting retainer to ease the leadership transition." There it was. The ask. They wanted silence, delay, cheap dignity wrapped in a tidy NDA. They wanted me to take monthly payments instead of the lump sum, spread it over years, reduce the quarterly impact. I didn't answer. I handed the phone to my attorney, Shelby Porter, who had been sitting across from me at the kitchen table sipping coffee and reading the Wall Street Journal like we were discussing the weather. She put the call on speaker and leaned forward. Her voice was even crisp, almost bored. Apex formally triggered Clause 18C effective as of Monday morning. My client has no interest in renegotiation. We expect full execution as filed. 30 days from activation, silence on the other end, then a breath. Well, Marcus said, "Quieter now. Perhaps we rushed a few things. Perhaps we can revisit the board motion?" "No," she cut in. "Clause 18C includes a board-son material change. It's been filed, time-stamped, public. Your only option now is compliance. More silence, no pleasantries this time." After a moment, he hung up politely, but without promise. I looked over at Shelby. She raised an eyebrow, then went back to her coffee. There was nothing to discuss, no room to haggle, no hand to play. They wanted to delay the pain. I wanted it done. When you spend 16 years holding up the structure, they forget you know where every critical component lives. And when they try to bury you under the operation you built, it's only fair to take the blueprints with you. It came through on a Thursday. No call, no email heads up, just a silent ping from the bank. An incoming wire transfer flagged as executive equity settlement. I clicked the notification, stared at the numbers, and let the quiet do what it does best. $6.8 million plus $95,000 in late penalties. The memo line read, as per executive agreement, no congratulations, no note from Drake, no apology. Just cold numbers and digital silence. Exactly the way I designed it. I sat there for a moment, coffee going cold in my mug, watching the balance update in real time. 116 years of precision work, reduced to a wire transfer on a Thursday morning. But that's the thing about systems. They don't care about sentiment. They just execute according to specs. I called Hunter at his apartment in Seattle. He picked up on the second ring, sounding like he'd been up all night working on some engineering project. Kid got that from me, I guess. "Dad? Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said. "Better than fine, actually. I just wanted you to know your old man's retirement fund got a significant boost today." There was a pause. Did something happen at work?" "Something happened. Yeah. I'll tell you about it when you come home for Thanksgiving, but Hunter?" I paused, looking out the kitchen window at the garage, where I'd built my first production specs all those years ago. Never let them make you think loyalty and stupidity are the same thing. There's a difference between being a team player and being played. He laughed, that deep sound that reminded me he wasn't a kid anymore. Noted. Dad, you feeling okay though? You sound different. I'm feeling like myself for the first time in a while, I said. And that was the truth. At Apex, they put out a leadership update that afternoon. It read like every other sanitized corporate communique. Polished, vague, and one sentence away from admitting nothing. Colton was being repositioned toward a non-operational strategic focus, which everyone knew meant put out to pasture without a desk. Drake, meanwhile, was stepping back to concentrate on external investor alignment and capital relationships. No one used the word demotion, but everyone knew. The real story was buried in the fine print of the Q3 disclosures, line 7C, sub-bullet 2, just after a blurb about forward-looking statements and liquidity benchmarks. It said, acceleration executed pursuant to Clause 18C filed and fulfilled. That was it. No headlines, no expose, no public reckoning. But that's the beauty of precision engineering. It doesn't need a spotlight, it just needs to hold. 2 weeks later, I was in my garage, reorganizing my tool chest when my phone rang. Unknown number, but local area code, I answered it. Garrison? This is Pete Morrison from Blackwater Defense Systems. Pete Morrison, I knew the name, former Navy, ran operations for one of our biggest competitors. We'd crossed paths at a few industry conferences over the years. Mutual respect, professional courtesy, that kind of thing. Pete, how you doing? I'm doing well, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. But I'm calling because I heard through the grapevine that you might be between opportunities right now, between opportunities. That was one way to put it. Word travels fast, I said. In this business? Hell yes, it does. Especially when someone with your reputation suddenly becomes available. Look, I'll cut to the chase. We just landed a $45 million contract with the Air Force. Precision components for next-generation fighter systems. I need someone who understands both the technical side and how to navigate DoD requirements without losing his shirt. I leaned against my workbench, considered it. Blackwater had a solid reputation, good people, no MBA hotshots trying to disrupt their way to disaster. What kind of role are we talking about? VP of Operations with equity, real equity, not the kind with fine print designed to screw you over. I read contracts for a living now, Garrison. Learned my lesson the hard way about 10 years ago. I laughed. Sounds like you and I have some stories to trade. That we do. You interested in a conversation? Yeah, I said, surprising myself. Yeah, I think 3 months later I'm writing this from my new office at Blackwater Defense Systems. Same industry, better people, and a contract that actually means what it says. Pete wasn't kidding about the equity package, straightforward language, no hidden clauses, no traps. Just an honest deal between people who respect each other's work. Every tool I built at Apex still runs. Every vendor relationship I negotiated still hums. The quality framework I wrote in 2014 is still the backbone of their Navy contract protocol. They didn't just fire an exec. They built their future on the foundation I left behind. And every day, Colton walks into an office wired for a system he doesn't understand, using tools he didn't earn, performing in a role that doesn't really exist. He won the title, but the machine still listens to the voice that built it. I heard through the industry network that they're having issues with the submarine contract. Quality control problems, vendor relationship headaches, the kind of systematic failures that happen when you remove institutional knowledge and replace it with PowerPoint presentations. They'll figure it out eventually, or they won't. That's not my problem anymore. Drake tried to reach out once, about 6 weeks after the payout. Left a voicemail talking about clearing the air and professional respect. I listened to it twice, then deleted it. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. Some lessons need to stick. As for me, I didn't splurge. I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't even tell most people. I just forwarded the wire confirmation to Shelby, updated my retirement accounts, and finally logged out of my Apex admin credentials for the last time. I'd written the perfect revenge, not out of spite but out of structure, not to burn the place down, but to prove I'd been the foundation all along. Because the thing about foundations, you don't always see them until the wrong people try to dig you up. But here's what I learned. The best revenge isn't just collecting what you're owed. It's building something better with people who understand the value of what you bring to the table. It's knowing that your next chapter doesn't have to be defined by how the last one ended. Hunter's coming home for Christmas next week. We're going to work on an old Chevy in the garage, and I'm going to tell him the whole story. Not the sanitized version, but the real one. About Clause 18C, about reading the fine print, about the difference between loyalty and stupidity. Most importantly, I'm going to tell him that sometimes the best way to win is to build the game so well that it doesn't matter who's playing. The system protects itself. And sometimes, if you're very careful and very patient, the system protects you too. You see, the real power isn't in the title on your business card. It's in being so essential to the system that removing you breaks everything they've built. They thought they were firing an employee, but what they actually did was trigger a failsafe designed by the guy who knew exactly how they'd try to screw him over.